The tea had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Dorothy Hargrove sat at the kitchen table she'd owned for 31 years, the one Robert had refinished by hand the summer Tyler broke his arm falling off the back porch, and she didn't care about the tea anymore. Outside, a thin curtain of December snow drifted past the window. Columbus was quiet this time of night, the kind of quiet that had a weight to it lately, the kind that pressed down on your chest if you let it. She had a Christmas card sitting on the table, half addressed. Sarah, Derek, and the kids. She'd been working up the energy to seal and stamp it for 3 days now. At 11:47 p.m., her phone buzzed once, just once, then silence. She picked it up expecting a weather alert, maybe a spam text about her expiring car warranty. Instead, she saw her daughter's name at the top of the screen. Sarah. The message was long enough that the preview cut off with an ellipsis, and Dorothy had to tap to open it. The way you have to make yourself open a letter you already know isn't going to have good news inside. She read it. Mom, Derek and I have talked about this a lot, and we both agree it's best if you don't come for Christmas this year. The kids are going through a hard time, and honestly, having you around creates more stress than it does comfort. We need some space from the disruption. Please respect our decision and don't make this into a whole thing. Dorothy read it once, then again, then a third time, because her brain kept trying to find the part she'd misread. The part where disruption was actually she would be missed, where don't make this into a whole thing was actually we'll call you Christmas morning. There wasn't a part like that. She set the phone face down on the table. The kitchen was so familiar it hurt. The cabinet Robert had rehung 3 times because he was particular about the angle. The scuff on the baseboard where Tyler used to drag his backpack every single morning without fail. The worn, pale patch near the refrigerator where Dorothy had stood twice a day for 30 years, making lunches and dinners and the occasional 2 a.m. snack when someone had a bad dream. This was the kitchen where Sarah had spread her textbooks across this very table every Monday night, where Kelsey had once fallen asleep on it after a late dance recital, where Robert had stood on Sunday mornings in his terrible green bathrobe making pancakes that always burned on one side, and where he'd insist every single time that no, they were perfectly golden, Dot. You just don't appreciate artisan technique. It was quiet now in a way it had never been when Robert was alive. Dorothy looked at this Christmas card. She looked at her phone. She looked at the cold tea. Then she did something that should have been simple but wasn't. Not for a 68-year-old woman who had spent the better part of her life measuring her own worth by how much she could give, how much she could smooth over, how much she could love without asking for a single thing in return. She opened her banking app. Her hands were not shaking. That was the thing she'd think about later. She expected them to shake. They didn't. She navigated to recurring transfers. The list was longer than it should have been. She scrolled past the electric bill, the internet, the small automatic donation to Riverside Elementary where she'd taught 4th grade for 34 years. She stopped at the one she was looking for. Sarah B., $3,200 per month. She pressed it. A menu appeared. At the bottom, 2 words. Cancel transfer. Her thumb, the one with Robert's wedding band still on the finger next to it. The ring she had never once taken off, not in the 2 years since the ambulance came, hovered for exactly 3 seconds. Then she pressed it. The app asked her to confirm. She confirmed. Transfer canceled. Dorothy Hargrove put the phone down, looked out the window at the falling snow and thought, I should have done that 5 years ago. She didn't sleep much that night, but for the first time in a long time, the sleeplessness felt like something beginning rather than something ending. Robert Hargrove died on a Tuesday afternoon in September 2022, 26 months before the night of the text message. He'd been cutting the grass. The backyard, the stubborn patch near the old oak tree that always gave the mower trouble. Dorothy had been inside starting a roast, which took forever, and which Robert always pretended to complain about while quietly eating 2 full helpings, when she heard the mower go quiet. She waited a moment, went to the window. He was on the ground. The stroke took him before the ambulance arrived. The paramedics were gentle about telling her. They said it was quick. She didn't know for a long time whether that made it better or worse. She still didn't know. What came after was a grief Dorothy had no real word for. It wasn't the clean, dramatic grief you see in movies. It was ordinary. It was the wrong number of coffee cups in the cabinet. It was buying a full gallon of milk and watching it expire because one person just doesn't go through milk that fast. It was the way the silence in the house changed, from the comfortable quiet of two people who'd been together long enough to not need to fill every moment, into something else, something that echoed. And into that silence, her children came. Sarah arrived within 4 hours of the funeral home call. She stayed 2 full weeks, organized the paperwork, handled the insurance calls, made sure the neighbors knew about the service, slept in the guest room, and came to check on Dorothy at odd hours. At the time, Dorothy thought, "This is what love looks like. This is my daughter showing up." She wasn't wrong exactly, but she wasn't entirely right either. The first time Sarah brought up money was about a month after the funeral. She framed it carefully, the way Sarah always framed things, gently, with that practiced tone that made you feel like you were the one doing the favor. "Mom, I hate even asking this. I really do. Derek and I got ourselves into a little bit of a hole with the cards last year. Nothing crazy, we're handling it. But with the insurance payout sitting there and you having more than enough to live on comfortably," Dorothy said yes. 6 months later, Tyler called about the house. He and Bryn had found a place they loved, but the market was insane and they were short on the down payment, and Tyler's voice on the phone had that particular strain to it that made Dorothy's chest hurt. "Mom, I know it's a lot to ask. How much do you need?" She said yes. "Then the grandchildren's college funds. Now's the best time to contribute, Mom, before tuition goes up again." Then a family vacation to Cancun that somehow ended up on Dorothy's credit card with a breezy, "We'll sort it out when we get back." Then a medical bill. Then a car repair. Then a month when Tyler's contracting business hit a rough patch and could Dorothy just help them cover their mortgage? Just this once, it would not become a habit. "Just a loan, Mom. Just until things settle down. We'll pay you back. We swear." Nobody paid Dorothy back. Not a cent. 26 months. One woman at a kitchen table with a legal pad and a stubby pencil, finally adding up numbers she'd been too afraid to look at all at once. Credit card payoffs for Sarah and Derek. 3 separate times, $74,000. Down payment assistance for Tyler and Bryn, $48,500. College fund contributions for 3 grandchildren, $62,400. The vacation, the medical bills, the just this month transfers, $55,700. Total, $240,600. Sit with that number for a second. $240,600 is 17 years of comfortable retirement living for a senior in Ohio at average spending. It is a 3-bedroom house in a decent Columbus neighborhood, paid in full, no mortgage. It is 8,000 hours of Dorothy Hargrove's teaching career, 34 years of standing in front of 25 9-year-olds every day and showing up completely, regardless of what was happening at home. It was the life insurance policy Robert had paid into for 28 years. The one he'd kept current even during the lean years, when Dorothy had suggested maybe they could pause it, and Robert had shaken his head with that quiet certainty he had. "That's not for us, Dot. That's for you. That's your safety net." 2 years after his death, the safety net was 3/4 gone. And the reason Dorothy handed it away so steadily, so willingly? She wasn't a pushover. She wasn't naive. She was afraid. Afraid of the specific silence a house develops when the children stop coming by regularly and the holidays thin out from celebrations into obligations. Afraid that if she stopped being useful, financially useful, the visits would get shorter, the calls would space out, and she would end up exactly where she was most terrified to be. That fear was the open door, and someone had walked right through it. Sarah Briggs was not a cartoon villain. That was important to understand. That was, in fact, the whole reason things got as far as they did. She was a real estate attorney, sharp, articulate, meticulous, the kind of person who wore her clothes like she'd thought about them and spoke in a way that was always 3 steps ahead of the conversation. She brought gifts every time she came to visit Dorothy. Never generic things. She remembered the specific lavender hand lotion from the little shop downtown. She knew to bring decaf because Dorothy had cut back on caffeine since her blood pressure spiked. When Dorothy mentioned the kitchen faucet was dripping, Sarah had a plumber scheduled within 48 hours. "You don't have to do all this," Dorothy told her once. "Mom, you literally spent 30 years doing everything for us," Sarah said, in a tone that was fond and slightly exasperated. "Let me take care of a faucet." The warmth was real enough, but it had architecture to it that Dorothy couldn't see from the inside. Sarah had been most present in the weeks immediately after Robert died, when Dorothy was most vulnerable and most grateful for company. The first money conversation came during that same window. Once Dorothy had grown accustomed to that presence, once she'd come to depend on the evening calls and the drop-by visits, a subtle shift began. Sarah started referencing, in passing, how much she'd rearranged her own schedule to be available, how much she'd put on hold. Not complaints, exactly, just small invoices for the emotional debt Dorothy was quietly accumulating. And anyone who might have offered Dorothy a different perspective, a neighbor, an old friend, her youngest daughter, was gently, persistently framed as an outsider who didn't understand the family dynamics, someone who meant well but didn't really get it. Carol Whitfield was the neighbor 3 houses down who had known Dorothy for 22 years. She was a retired nurse with the clinical eye of someone who'd spent 4 decades watching people and making fast assessments. One afternoon, she came over to drop off zucchini from her garden and found Dorothy at the kitchen table writing a check. A large one. Carol could see the number from the doorway. "Dot," she said carefully. "Is everything okay?" Dorothy looked up and smiled with that tired warmth she'd had increasingly lately. "Sarah says it's an investment in the grandkids' future. It's fine, Carol. Robert would have wanted this." Carol didn't say anything more that day. She went home and wrote the date in her journal. Just the date, in 3 words. Something is wrong. Tyler Hargrove was not a bad person. This was, in many ways, the saddest part of his story. He was 39 years old, ran a small residential contracting business that did decent work but never quite broke even, and had been in his older sister's orbit for so long that he'd lost track of where her gravity ended and his own will began. He was the kind of guy his buddies described as solid, reliable, decent, the one who showed up to help you move without being asked twice. He coached his nephew's Little League team. He made good chili. He called his mother every Sunday, mostly. He loved Dorothy, genuinely. When he was a kid, he was the one who drew her cards, the one who cried when she was sick, the one who crawled into her bed during thunderstorms well past the age when that was considered normal and didn't care. He had her eyes, that pale blue that could look either calm or heartbroken depending on the light. But Tyler had grown up in Sarah's shadow, and in that shadow he'd learned a lesson so thoroughly he'd forgotten it was a lesson. Agreeing with Sarah was the path of least resistance, and resistance had a cost. The first time Tyler had pushed back on her, he was 22, the disagreement was trivial, something he couldn't even remember now. She'd gone cold on him for 4 months, not angry, just cold. No returned calls, no eye contact at family dinners. He called it her deep freeze. He had never wanted to go back there. So when Sarah started talking about the plan, about what was fair, about what Mom had and what the family was owed, Tyler listened. He told himself it made sense. His wife Bryn was less convinced. "I don't think this is right," she told Tyler after the house down payment came through. They were sitting on the floor of their new bedroom eating takeout because they didn't have furniture yet. "You don't understand how our family works," Tyler said. Bryn was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "I think that might be the problem." Tyler steered the conversation somewhere else. Bryn didn't push, but she kept watching, and she kept notes, not on paper, but in her memory and in her phone, the specific kind of inventory you keep when you know a reckoning is coming and you want to be ready when it does. Dorothy had 3 children. Most people who knew the family only really knew 2. Kelsey Hargrove was 36 years old and lived in Portland, Oregon, in a small house with her husband Daniel and their daughter Rosie, who was 3 and had inherited Dorothy's pale blue eyes and Robert's stubborn hair that went every direction at once. Kelsey worked as an accountant. She had a vegetable garden and a dog named Biscuit, and a life that was, by most measures, genuinely good. The kind of good you build deliberately after you've left somewhere you couldn't afford to stay. She'd left at 24, 2 suitcases, a full tank of gas, and a phone call from somewhere on I-70 that Dorothy still thought about sometimes in the dark. "Mom, I love you. I want you to know that first, but I can't stay in this family anymore, not the way it is. When you're ready to hear why, actually ready, not just saying you are, call me." Dorothy hadn't called, not because she didn't want to, because within 48 hours of that phone call, Sarah had sat down with her and explained gently and at length that Kelsey had some issues, could be volatile and dramatic. Her leaving was ultimately probably the best outcome for everyone's stress levels. "You know how she is, Mom." And the thing was, Dorothy thought she did. Kelsey had always been the difficult one, opinionated, quick to say what no one else would say out loud. She'd been the one at Thanksgiving who'd called out Derek's business scheme as a pyramid scheme dressed in a blazer and caused a 40-minute argument that ruined dessert. Dorothy had always privately thought Kelsey was right more often than she was wrong. She just hadn't thought it loudly enough to do anything about it. For 12 years, she watched Kelsey's life through the window of Facebook. Birthdays, the wedding, the pregnancy. Little Rosie's first steps in a video Dorothy watched 17 times and never commented on. She'd saved Kelsey's number in her contacts as just K. She'd stared at it sometimes late at night. She'd never dialed it. Not yet. The next morning at 9:03 a.m., Sarah called. Dorothy was standing at the kitchen counter with a fresh cup of coffee, actually hot this time, watching the snow that had accumulated overnight on the back lawn. The yard looked clean and still. The oak tree where Robert had been cutting grass stood heavy and white. She looked at Sarah's name on the screen for one full ring. Then she answered. "Hey, Mom." Sarah's voice was its usual morning register, controlled, neutral, the kind of voice that gave nothing away, not a hint of last night's text, not an ounce of awkwardness. So the transfer didn't come through. Did something happen with the bank? Sometimes they flag recurring ones for a security review. Dorothy took a sip of her coffee. "It came through fine. I canceled it." 3 full seconds of silence. "I'm sorry, what?" "I canceled the transfer, Sarah, and the others. All of them." "Mom," a fraction colder, the way the temperature in a room changes when someone opens a window in winter. "Did someone talk to you about this? Was it Carol? Because I've told you, that woman has been sticking her nose in our family's business since—" "I'm going to go now," Dorothy said. "Mom, just wait a second." Dorothy ended the call. That afternoon, Carol came over. They sat in the living room with fresh coffee and the kind of silence between old friends that doesn't need filling. Dorothy told her about the text, the canceled transfers, the phone call that morning. Carol listened without interrupting. Then Dorothy mentioned Robert's letter, the one he'd apparently left with instructions, the one she'd never been able to find since the week after his funeral. Carol set down her coffee cup very carefully. "Dot, there's something I should have told you a long time ago." Her voice was steady but carried something underneath it. "Right after Robert died, that first week when Sarah was staying here, I came by with that casserole. The back door was unlocked, so I just let myself in. I found Sarah in Robert's study." A pause. She was standing at his desk, reading something, a piece of paper, folded up. When she noticed me, she just slipped it into her purse, smooth as anything, smiled and said, "Wasn't it nice I'd come?" The living room went very quiet. "I told myself it was insurance paperwork," Carol said. "I didn't want to assume the worst. But now that you're saying the letter's been gone since that same week..." Dorothy sat very still, looking at the coffee table, the same one where Robert used to rest his feet during football, the one with the ring stain from a mug he'd set there 10,000 times. And she felt something shift, not dramatically, quietly, the way the ground shifts in spring when the frost finally goes out. The letter hadn't been lost. It had been taken, in the first week, before Dorothy had even stopped expecting to hear Robert's car in the driveway. "Carol," she said. Her voice was entirely steady. "Robert's study, his green address book. Can you come with me to look for something?" They found it within 10 minutes. Bottom drawer of Robert's desk, under a stack of old utility receipts. Green address book, dog-eared at the corners. Under H, in Robert's precise engineering school handwriting, Raymond Holt, Elder Law and Estate Protection, 614-555-0182. Below the number in smaller print, like an afterthought. "Good man. Knows what he's doing. Call him if things go sideways, Dot." Dorothy looked at Carol. Carol looked at Dorothy. "I think things have gone sideways," Dorothy said. Raymond Holt's office was not impressive. That was, Dorothy would learn, entirely intentional. No mahogany desk, no framed diplomas arranged for maximum intimidation. Just a second-floor walk-up on Broad Street with a waiting room that smelled like old coffee and carpet cleaner, 2 mismatched chairs, and a receptionist named Donna, who looked like she'd seen everything and was no longer surprised by any of it. The only thing on the walls was a single framed quote, plain black text on white paper. "The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any." Raymond Holt was 55, medium height, with the kind of face that was forgettable at first glance and memorable the second time. Sharp eyes behind plain wireframe glasses. a handshake that was firm without performing anything. He had been handling elder abuse and guardianship cases for 20 years. He didn't look at Dorothy like she was fragile. He looked at her like she was a client. She sat across from him and laid out the whole thing. The money, the transfers, the text message, Sarah's call the next morning, Robert's missing letter, Carol's account of what she'd witnessed in the study. Holt listened without writing anything down until she finished. Then he folded his hands on the desk. Mrs. Hargrove, in the past 2 years, have you noticed any changes in your memory? Difficulty concentrating, brain fog, getting confused in familiar places? Dorothy blinked. A little. Fatigue, mostly. My doctor said it was grief-related. Who usually brought you to those appointments? A beat. Sarah. Usually Sarah. Holt picked up his pen, started writing. Here's what we're going to do. Today, before you go home, you're going to your bank in person and opening a new account. New number, new login, new everything. Tell no one. He looked up. Second, call your doctor and get a full cognitive evaluation scheduled. Not because anything is wrong with you, he added, reading her expression, but because I want that documentation clean and current before anyone tries to use it against us. Against us? Dorothy repeated. Mrs. Hargrove. He leaned forward slightly. What you've described is a textbook pattern of elder financial abuse with the groundwork laid for a guardianship play. I've seen it over 200 times. What I haven't seen often enough is someone catching it while there's still time to fight back. A pause. You caught it. Now let's fight. Dorothy walked out of his office 45 minutes later and stood on Broad Street in the January cold, feeling something she hadn't felt in 2 years, maybe longer, like somebody was in her corner. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. Dorothy opened her new bank account. She changed every password, email, utilities, everything, writing them in a small notebook kept in her bedside drawer under a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird that had been there since 1987. She saw Dr. Evelyn Stafford, who ran a full cognitive battery and found absolutely nothing wrong. Sharp as a tack. Stafford's exact words. Sarah went quiet. No calls, no texts, nothing. Dorothy almost let herself believe that maybe the canceled transfers had been enough of a message, that everyone would just let it settle. She almost believed it. Then, on January 22nd, a certified envelope arrived from the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas. Dorothy opened it at the kitchen table with the small paring knife Robert had always kept sharp. A dull knife is more dangerous than a sharp one, Dot. That's basic physics. And read the document twice. Then she called Holt. They filed, she said when he answered. Sarah Briggs and Tyler Hargrove, as co-petitioners, were requesting the court appoint Sarah Briggs as legal guardian over Dorothy M. Hargrove, on grounds of significant cognitive decline, evidenced by repeated failure to manage basic financial obligations, a documented incident of disorientation at a public location, and a pattern of financially reckless decision-making inconsistent with the subject's established history. A brief silence on the line. Raymond? Dorothy said. I'm here. Tyler signed on to this. Yeah? A pause. I see that. She looked out the window at the backyard, the oak tree, the snow-covered ground where Robert had been standing that Tuesday in September. Okay, she said. So what do we do? She sat in the parking lot of Kroger for 41 minutes before she dialed. She'd driven there on autopilot, not actually needing groceries, just needing somewhere neutral to park. She sat with the engine off and the heat slowly fading out of the car and the phone in her lap, open to the contact she'd had for 12 years. She'd updated the number once. Kelsey had changed carriers, and Dorothy had tracked down the new one through a mutual acquaintance from Kelsey's high school, then saved it quietly and said nothing, just in case. She'd never let herself examine too closely what in case meant. She dialed. It rang twice, 3 times. Dorothy was already composing the voicemail in her head. Hi, honey, it's Mom. I know it's been a long time. Hello? Kelsey's voice. Careful, not unfriendly, but guarded in the way of someone who has learned that unexpected calls from old numbers don't always mean good things. Kelsey? Dorothy's voice came out smaller than she intended. It's Mom. A beat. Then, Mom. Not a question, just the word, landing. Are you okay? No, baby, I'm really not. Silence, but not the cold kind. The kind that meant someone was figuring out how to open a door they'd thought was locked for good. Tell me, Kelsey said. So Dorothy told her. All of it. The transfers, the text, the court filing. She talked for 20 minutes straight, sitting in that cold parking lot while the windows slowly fogged around her, and Kelsey didn't interrupt once, which Dorothy recognized with a pang as something she'd gotten from Robert. When Dorothy finished, Kelsey was quiet for a moment. "Mom, I need you to actually hear me, not through Sarah's filter. Can you do that?" "I'm listening. I didn't leave because I was unstable." Kelsey's voice was measured, but there was something underneath it. Not anger exactly. Something older. "I left because Sarah told me to keep quiet about something I'd seen. Something involving Derek. I didn't have proof. Just a bad feeling I couldn't shake, and Sarah made it very clear that if I opened my mouth, she'd make sure everyone thought I was the problem." A pause. "I was 24 and I didn't know what else to do." "What did you see?" Dorothy asked. "I can't explain it all properly on the phone, but Mom, the person you really need to talk to is Bryn, Tyler's wife. I know that might sound strange." "Bryn? Trust me on this one. She knows things. I think she's been waiting for someone to ask." Dorothy pressed her fingertips to her forehead. The car was very cold now. She hadn't noticed. "Kelsey," she said, "my lawyer needs you. Would you come?" "I'll fly in whenever you need me," Kelsey said immediately, like she'd been waiting 12 years to say it. "Just say when, Mom." Dorothy pressed her hand to her mouth, held it there for a second. "Thank you," she managed. "Don't thank me yet." And there was something in Kelsey's voice then, that sharp, unsentimental warmth that Dorothy had always privately loved and never protected loudly enough. "We haven't won anything yet." 3 weeks before the trial date, Dr. Stafford called Raymond Holt directly. Dorothy was in Holt's office when he took the call. She watched his face. She'd gotten good at reading it, and saw something move across it. Not shock. More like the expression of someone who suspected something ugly and is now being told it's uglier than they thought. He listened for 4 minutes, said "Send me everything," and hung up. "Mrs. Hargrove, the monthly vitamins Sarah's been sending you, the senior wellness blend, you've been taking them every day?" "Every morning," Dorothy said, "for about a year and a half." Stafford had them analyzed. Holt set his pen down. "They contain significantly elevated levels of diphenhydramine. That's the active ingredient in Benadryl, in sleep aids, combined with several herbal compounds that amplify the sedative effect. At the dosage you've been taking, every single day over 18 months, he stopped, then, it would produce exactly the symptoms you described to me. The brain fog, the fatigue, the short-term memory lapses." The room was completely quiet. Dorothy looked at the window. She thought about every morning for a year and a half. The little capsules she'd lined up next to her orange juice. The texts she'd occasionally sent Sarah. "Got the new bottle, thank you, sweetheart." And the thumbs-up emoji Sarah would send back. "She made me sick," Dorothy said. Not a question. "She manufactured the evidence," Holt says, he said. "Then she filed a lawsuit based on it." Dorothy Hargrove sat in that chair, and she did not cry. She had done her crying, alone in the house, for Robert, for what she'd given away, for the version of her family she'd been grieving without knowing that was what she was doing. She wasn't going to cry for this. "Tell me," she said, her voice level, "everything we need to win." 3 weeks passed. Holt built the case piece by piece. Stafford's analysis, the trust documents, the email chain with Robert's attorney Patterson. Dorothy waited. She'd always been told waiting was the hardest part. She didn't find it particularly hard. Waiting was easy when, for the first time in 2 years, you knew exactly what you were waiting for. Then, on a Tuesday night at 11:14 p.m., Holt's office phone rang. Bryn Hargrove. Holt took the call, asked for and received consent to record, and listened for 20 minutes. The next morning he relayed it to Dorothy methodically, the way he always presented information. No dramatics, just facts in sequence. But Dorothy could tell, watching him, that even Raymond Holt, 20 years, 200 cases, had found this one worth sitting with. Bryn had been at a Thanksgiving dinner 2 years ago, 3 months after Robert's funeral. Adults eating, kids in the basement. Bryn went upstairs looking for a bathroom and took a wrong turn near Derek's home office, the door of which was cracked open. She heard her name, or thought she did, and stopped. What she heard instead was Derek's voice, low and deliberate. "The trust has to go first. As long as that thing is active, we can't touch the principal. I've already dealt with Patterson. He thinks Dorothy asked us to handle it." Then, Once that's cleared, we start building the record. The supplements will handle the symptoms. We document everything. The missed bills, the confusion, whatever we can get. Give it a year, maybe 18 months, then we file. As her guardian, you have full discretion over distributions from the estate. Sarah's voice, quieter. And if she pushes back? Derek, she won't. She never has. Bryn had stood in that hallway for a long time. Then she'd gone back downstairs and eaten a piece of Thanksgiving pie she didn't taste. She'd told Tyler into the car on the way home. Word for word. He'd stared at the road and said she must have misheard. That Sarah would never. That Bryn had never liked Sarah, and sometimes that colored things. Tyler, you don't know how our family works. I know what I heard, Bryn said. He went to bed without another word. In the morning, he acted like the conversation hadn't happened. So Bryn had done the only thing available to her. Before she went to sleep that night, she typed out every word she could remember and time-stamped it in a locked note on her phone. 2 months later, when she found a voicemail from Derek asking Tyler to make sure Bryn doesn't have any ideas about running her mouth, she recorded that too. She'd been building the file for 2 years. She saved everything, Holt told Dorothy. Dates, verbatim recollections, the voicemail. Combined with the supplement analysis, the suppressed trust, and the Patterson emails, it's a complete picture. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Why didn't she come forward sooner? Holt looked at her over his glasses. She loves Tyler. She was hoping he'd find his backbone on his own before it came to this. A pause. She gave him 2 years. The night before the trial, Dorothy went into their bedroom. She sat on Robert's side of the bed, the side she hadn't slept on in 2 years, still somehow holding a faint indent from 31 years of the same body in the same place, and she let herself just be in the room. Kelsey was down the hall in the guest room. She'd arrived from Portland that afternoon, rolling her carry-on through the front door and looking around the house with the specific expression of someone checking a place they've carried in memory against the reality of it. They'd eaten dinner together, talked properly. Not about the trial, just talked, catching up on 12 years across a few hours. Kelsey showed her videos of Rosie. Dorothy told her about Robert's Italy folder, the magazine clippings he'd kept for years. Kelsey laughed, Robert's laugh, short and genuine, and said, "Mom, we are going to Italy. That's a promise. After all this." Now the house was quiet, and Dorothy sat on Robert's side of the bed in the dark, not looking for anything, just being there. Then her eyes went to the nightstand drawer. She'd opened it 100 times in the past 2 years, the small impulse you get in a quiet house to touch things that belong to someone. His reading glasses, a crumpled hardware receipt, a golf pencil worn down to almost nothing. Something made her pull the drawer all the way out. At the very back, under everything, taped flat with 2 strips of yellowed masking tape, was an envelope. White, her name on the front in Robert's handwriting. That precise, slightly old-fashioned print he'd had since engineering school, every letter formed like it was load-bearing. Dot. Just that. She held it for a long moment. Her hands were not shaking, same as the night with the bank app, same as every moment in this long process when she'd expected herself to fall apart and hadn't. She thought, Robert knew I wouldn't fall apart. He always knew that. She opened it. Dot, if you're reading this, you found it when you needed it. I know you probably found my address book first. Good. That's the practical part sorted. This part is just for you. I've been trying to figure out how to say this for a while. You know I'm better with load-bearing walls than with words, so bear with me. You have spent your entire life making yourself useful so that people would love you. I watched you do it for 38 years. I watched you do it with the kids, with your students, with the neighbors, with me. Though I want you to know, for the record, that I would have loved you if you'd never cooked a single meal or remembered a single birthday. I loved you before you ever did a thing for me. I'll love you long after. You are not what you give, Dot. I think somewhere along the way you forgot that giving and being loved were 2 separate things. I should have said it more clearly when I was there to say it. That's on me. The money I've left isn't for them. It's not for loans or down payments or fixing problems that aren't yours to fix. It's for Italy. It's for the Tuesday mornings when you want to sleep in. It's for whatever you want, because you have spent 34 years giving other people's children your very best, and you are owed some best. If things have gone sideways, and I want to be honest, I worried they might, Raymond Holt will help you. Carol will too. You already know which one to call for what. You are enough, not your money, not your usefulness, not your willingness to say yes when every part of you knows the answer is no. Just you, exactly as you are. You have always been exactly enough. I love you. I always will. Robert. Dorothy read it once. Then she folded it carefully along its original creases and held it in both hands in the dark. She didn't say anything out loud, but she thought very clearly and very quietly, "Okay, I hear you." Then she went to sleep and for the first time in 2 years, slept straight through until morning. Franklin County Court of Common Pleas, February 2024. The kind of cold Columbus morning where the sky is the color of old concrete and the courtroom feels, paradoxically, overly warm. Dorothy wore her navy coat, the one Robert bought her for their 30th anniversary, the one he'd said made her eyes look like the Atlantic on a clear day. Beside her, Holt, with a file folder roughly the thickness of a paperback novel. Kelsey in a dark blazer, jaw set. Across the aisle, Sarah and Derek with their attorney Pryor, a man who had the professionally compassionate demeanor of someone who had made a career of making terrible things sound reasonable. Tyler sat at the far end of that table, not sitting the way he usually sat, sitting like a man who hadn't slept much and had come to a decision in the dark. Judge Patricia Owens entered at 9:02 a.m., 62 years old, short silver hair, the particular energy of someone who had zero patience for nonsense, dressed up in legalese. She'd been on the bench for 19 years. Pryor went first, and he was good. He built Sarah as a devoted daughter at her wit's end. He had documentation, an overdue phone bill, the Kroger incident report, a financial advisor's assessment using terms like pattern inconsistent with established behavior. Sarah took the stand and was composed and worried and briefly tearful in exactly the right measure. She looked like a good daughter doing a hard thing. Dorothy watched her perform love for a courtroom and felt something crystallize. Not anger, not grief, just the final clear version of understanding something she'd been circling for a long time. Then Holt stood up. He started quiet. He usually did. First, Dr. Stafford's complete cognitive evaluation, 4 weeks current. Dorothy in the top 30% for her age group across every metric. Stafford on the stand, 11 years as Dorothy's physician, 0 clinical concerns. Second, the supplement analysis, independent pharmacological report, diphenhydramine levels quantified, duration of exposure estimated, brand name on the bottle cross-referenced to an online account registered to 4417 Elmwood Drive, Sarah and Derek's home address. The courtroom went very quiet. Third, Robert's updated trust documents alongside the email chain in which Sarah had systematically dismantled the financial protection Robert had spent his final months building without Dorothy's knowledge or consent. Fourth, Holt reached into his folder and looked at Judge Owens. "Your Honor, with this court's permission, I'd like to play a recording." Pryor was on his feet. "Objection. Obtained legally. Consenting party to the conversation. Ohio is a one-party consent state." "Overruled. Play it." Derek's voice filled the courtroom. Flat, deliberate, mapping out, in his own words, exactly what he and Sarah had planned, and how. "As her guardian, you have full discretion over distributions from the estate." Dorothy looked at Sarah. Sarah was looking at the table. Derek was also looking at the table, jaw the specific gray of someone calculating very fast how bad this was. Then Tyler Hargrove stood up. Nobody expected it. Pryor turned. Sarah's head came up. Even Holt paused. Tyler was not a dramatic man. He had spent most of his adult life specifically avoiding drama. He looked, standing there, like someone who had made a decision that scared him and was going to do it anyway, which was the bravest version of Tyler Hargrove that had ever existed. "Your Honor," he said. His voice was not steady, but it was clear. "I'd like to withdraw my name from this petition, and I'd like to testify as a witness for my mother." The gavel came down once. Judge Owens looked at Tyler for a long moment over her reading glasses. "Sit down for now, Mr. Hargrove. We'll get to you." He sat. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked at Dorothy, across the room, and Dorothy looked back at her middle child, the one who'd cried at thunderstorms, who'd burned breakfast every time he tried to make it, and she didn't smile. But she held his gaze, and she nodded once. It was enough. Judge Owens dismissed the guardianship petition before noon. She found no credible evidence of cognitive impairment and substantial evidence of coordinated financial manipulation. She referred the matter to the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office for review and ordered both Sarah and Derek to surrender their passports pending investigation. In the hallway afterward, Kelsey put her arm around Dorothy's shoulders and didn't say anything. Carol was there too, coat already on, ready to take her home. "So," Carol said with that dry, steady warmth she'd had for 22 years of neighborhood mornings. "Lunch?" Dorothy laughed. "The real kind, short and surprised and genuine." "Yeah," she said. "Lunch sounds exactly right." 6 months after the trial, Dorothy finally cleaned Robert's study. Not dusted, cleaned. The kind that meant making decisions, which was different. She'd been putting it off because making decisions about his things felt like a referendum on whether she was ready to keep living forward, and for a long time she hadn't been sure she was ready to find out the answer. She was ready now. She pulled everything out of the bottom desk drawer. Old receipts, a broken compass, 3 pens that didn't work, the green address book worn at the corners. And at the very back, taped flat against the inside bottom with 2 strips of masking tape yellowed with age, was a second envelope, smaller than the first. No name on the front, just a strip of tape and a note in Robert's handwriting. "Open when you're ready to start something new." Inside, a folded piece of paper, an account number, a bank branch address in downtown Columbus, and one handwritten line, approximately $180,000, enough to begin. R. Dorothy sat down on the floor of the study with her back against the bookshelf, and she did something she hadn't done in a very long time. She laughed and cried at the same time. Because of course he had. Of course Robert Hargrove, who double-checked load-bearing calculations and kept jumper cables in the trunk and sharpened knives before they were dull, had built a second layer. Of course he'd looked at his family, looked at Dorothy, looked at the particular softness in her that he loved and that also quietly scared him, and thought, one safety net might not be enough. She pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. "You impossible, wonderful man," she thought. "You thought of everything." 8 months after the trial, Sarah called. Dorothy was in the backyard pulling up the last of the autumn garden when her phone rang. She stood there in her gardening gloves with dirt on her knees, looking at the screen. Then she answered. "Mom," different voice. Not the lawyer voice. Something stripped down and tired that Dorothy hadn't heard since Sarah was maybe 16, calling home sick from a school trip and too proud to say so. "Do you have a minute?" "I have a minute," Dorothy said. A long pause. "Derek filed for divorce 2 weeks ago." Another pause. "I just thought you should know." "I'm sorry to hear it," Dorothy said. And she meant it, not for Derek, but for the version of Sarah that had once been a little girl doing homework at the kitchen table, who somewhere along the way had decided that love was a transaction and control was safety. "Are you?" Sarah asked. "Yes." "Mom," Sarah's voice cracked slightly, just once before she pulled it back together. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" Dorothy looked at the oak tree across the yard. The grass under it was coming in thick and green, new growth over the place where Robert had fallen, the yard not knowing anything had ended there, just quietly going on. "I don't know yet," Dorothy said. "I think forgiveness is a long road, and I'm only just getting started on it." She paused. "But I want you to know something, Sarah. What you did doesn't get to define me. I know who I am. I'm Robert's wife. I'm Tyler's mother and Kelsey's mother and little Rosie's grandmother. I'm a woman who taught 4th grade for 34 years and still gets Christmas cards from students who are in their 40s now." She pulled off one gardening glove, smoothed it in her hand. "That's who I am. Not the account balance, not the transfers, not any of it." Silence. "Who are you, Sarah?" Dorothy asked, gently, genuinely. "Not the lawyer, not Derek's wife, not what you've done. Who are you underneath all of that?" Sarah didn't answer. Maybe she didn't know yet. Maybe that was the work she had left to do. "Take care of yourself," Dorothy said. "I mean that." She hung up, stood in the yard a moment, the phone warm in her hand. Then she put her gardening glove back on and went back to work, her hands in the cold, good earth, while somewhere above her a cardinal landed in the oak tree and made its small, bright sound into the autumn air. The city smelled like coffee and old stone and something floral Dorothy couldn't name. She stood on a narrow street in Trastevere in the late afternoon. the kind of golden light that had no equivalent in Ohio, falling sideways across buildings that had been standing longer than the country she came from had existed. Her feet hurt pleasantly. She'd been walking since 9 that morning with no particular destination and no particular schedule, which was something she was still learning how to do without feeling guilty about it. In her coat pocket was a photograph, their wedding portrait, wallet-sized, the one she'd carried for 40 years. She hadn't taken it out yet today. She didn't need to. She knew he was there. She stood still for a moment, taking in the cobblestones, the orange buildings, the laundry strung between windows, the whole improbable, gorgeous reality of it all, and she breathed in Roman air and thought, we should have come years ago, then more quietly. But we're here now. Back home, Tyler and Bryn were still rebuilding. Slowly, honestly, the way things get rebuilt when you stop pretending the cracks aren't there. Kelsey had moved back to Columbus, 15 minutes away, and Rosie had taken to calling Dorothy Grandma Dot in a way that made Dorothy's chest feel almost too full. Carol still brought dinner every Thursday. Sarah was facing her legal consequences, and somewhere in there, perhaps herself. Derek was gone and suited everyone just fine, and Dorothy Hargrove, who had given away $240,600 out of fear and nearly lost everything else out of the same, was standing on a street in Rome in the April light, with Robert's photograph in her pocket and the rest of her life, unhurried, ahead of her. She started walking. Dorothy's biggest mistake was never the money. It was the belief, so deeply held she didn't even know it was a belief, that she had to earn her place in the room. Robert knew better. It just took her a little while to catch up to him. She got there.